All right, good morning, everyone. Morning Colors has been played at the U.S. Naval Academy. I heard it through my window. And so, do you know where your children are? We are going to continue on with reading The Unseen Partner by Diane Croft this morning. This will be part 6 of this reading. And we are also reading from A Mystical Path Less Traveled, a Jungian Psychological Perspective by Jerry Wright. The Unseen Partners by Diane Croft. Jerry Wright will be appearing with us live this afternoon at 2 p.m. And so I will put the link to our Wisdom Path colloquia. And if you wish to attend that as a panelist, you can sign up on our MailChimp schedule and be included. Jerry has not required that it only be on Zoom, so his session today will be broadcast live stream on YouTube. But next week, Diane Croft again has forbidden recording and no YouTube. So if you wish to attend Diane Croft's session next week live, you must do it on Zoom, and you need to sign up on this MailChimp account in order to know how to get to it. So I hope you'll join us both today at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time and next Sunday, April 25th at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. So today I'm going to continue on with first with The Unseen Partner. And as most of you know, I think Diane Croft's model or map of how she's put her book together is to first put a poem that came to her spontaneously and numinously during a 3-year period about 20 years ago. And good morning, Art, welcome. Then she puts an image that expresses the same idea, and then a quote from a famous individual, and finally her own commentary, after which Jordan and I will provide our commentary to a degree, so as hopefully not to detract from what Diane is saying. And so first we're going to read from The Unseen Partner, and today's first topic is taken. Just leave it at that. So it's taken, and the poem is, does the bird imagine herself flying? Sorry, start over. Does the bird imagine herself flying before she takes wing? Or does she simply start moving and is taken? And the topic of this 2-page section is taken. And the image, I guess I'm going to get rid of my cloaking here. It doesn't work well in this context. Okay, so the topic is taken. The image is a bird on wing. And the quote is, you feel and see yourself carried away, you know not whither. And that's from St. Teresa, from her book, Vita. Okay, Diane's commentary. Taken. What I want to emphasize here is the involuntary nature of the experience. I was taken. I knew not where or why, but first I had to exert every last ounce of energy to take flight on my own, and then to fail. Try as I might, I could not get rid of my ego self, that pleasure-seeking, power-seeking usurper in the psyche, that aspect of myself that I believed made things happen in my life. that without it, I would fail. Even now, I remember the relief I felt the day I discovered this quote by Sari Sphiri in The Taste of Hidden Things. Quote, to counsel, subquote, get rid of the ego, end subquote, is to ask the impossible. Get rid of the ego is to ask the impossible. One simply cannot do it. The nafs will not be chased away by willpower and persuasion. The experience of an egoless state can only be granted. It can be given, and it is given only when the seeker becomes truly constrained, end quote. To be constrained in this context means that first the ego must make every effort to endure the ordeal in search of its meaning, only to reach a state of utter helplessness where every effort fails to bring the intended result. Despair is a state of beyond fear. Only when the ego prostrates itself in recognition of the larger transpersonal energies within. Only when you are down on your knees may grace be given. He who embellishes his exterior with effort, mujahada, God graces his interior with vision, mushahada. Okay. So let me read that again without the parentheticals. He who embellishes his exterior with effort, God graces his interior with vision. So, Jordan.
Yeah, two short things. Just when it started with Vita from St. Teresa, it reminds me of the Costa Rican phrase, Pura Vida, which is a whole life, a clean life. And then he who embellishes his exterior with effort, God graces his interior with vision, reminds me of the biblical passage of he who takes care of the small things will be given much. So I think that she really runs the whole vessel of life. I mean, Vita means life. And this passage here, especially as she finishes in that last piece, puts it together with a really apt poetry.
Yes, indeed. I guess I would say that one of the self-help book things that you read very often, there are shelves of it over at Barnes and Noble, is to vision your success, to make a vision of your success, and then it will come to you. And to a degree, that's okay, but it takes a lot more than that. And I know just a couple of things in my lifetime that I visioned a success and I couldn't get there for some reason or other. One was during my Marine Corps career when I was a lieutenant colonel, and I was very concentrated on doing the next thing to make sure I could get promoted. And as I was doing that, I didn't notice the world around me, which had turned to ice. And I got out of my car on a parking lot at Marine Corps Base Quantico, and boom, I went down on the ice. And I was lying there with my foot off of my leg for about 15 minutes. And finally, there was a large hill up above me, and I heard somebody going to his car in the upper section up above me in a higher level of the base. And so I shouted for help, and somebody came to the edge of the cliff and looked down, and I said, "Hey, I broke my leg. I need an ambulance." And so he said, "Okay, I'll get it." And so he went away, and I'm still there and looking at my foot, which was not on my leg at the time. And about 15 minutes later, a fire truck shows up, followed by an ambulance. But the fire truck drives into the parking lot, and obviously was in the way of the ambulance. But the Marine Corps always sends a fire truck when they send an ambulance for reasons only understood by them. But finally, the ambulance was in position, and the shotgun in the ambulance jumps out of the ambulance, and he runs around the back of it, and bam, he went down too. And so he dislocated his shoulder. And so in the process of the cleanup, by then there were a few people swarming about. He and I both got in the back of the ambulance and were taken to the hospital. And so the best laid plans. But that accident, which Jung and Dr. Edward Edinger would call not accidents, because in both cases we were not paying attention well enough, led to the best part of my life, actually, in an entirely different field. And I had to leave the Marine Corps behind. That was the last thing I did in uniform. And or at least the last official thing I did in uniform. And it really got me. And that story went on a little longer than I wanted, so I'll leave it at that. But that's the sort of thing that you can be taken with, and then it can lead to something great, but you have to go with it. You have to go with the flow. And that's the message of Jungian psychology, that you have to go with the self.
You've never mentioned the ambulance and the fire truck than what that I've heard before. And then the EMT going down and dislocating his shoulder. That finishes the circle. The snake just bit its tail, because what's interesting is life's passing you by while you're busy making plans, and then you don't realize it until literally you lose a foot, not footing, you lost a foot, and then you're in such a dangerous magnet place that anyone coming to help you gets hurt too.
Yeah.
And in a sense, he was a coupled pairing, confirming that then, you went into the hospital in traction and you sat there, which was not your mode of being. You were moving, you're going, doing things. And like you said, it led to the most beautiful piece. So it feels like your foot coming off and then his shoulder. So this is above and below the heart. It's lopped off. It's like you in a sense got a shamanic dismemberment. His head came off above after his shoulder. Your foot comes off, and all that's left is the heart. So I mean, I didn't know about the ambulance, the fire truck, or even the comic relief that's, of course, the fire. I saw that coming. Oh, the fire truck's going to stop, isn't it? And the ambulance can't come help you.
It was a Keystone Cops scene, I have to say.
Very much.
But then by then the Marine Corps had given up its hospital at Quantico, and so we were taken to a civilian hospital. And this was in 1990, before things like the Gulf War had really gotten going. And the attending physician had to do what the rough and ready fix of putting your foot back on your leg is, but he did it. It was quite painful. And his name was Dr. Jihad. And I said,
oh, boy.
why do I not want to have this man operate on my foot? And so that was, I don't know, 11. By then it was probably 10 in the morning. And he said, I'm going to come back and operate at 5. And so I expected that, I wasn't going to have any choice. But at 3, my colonel showed up, and he said that the Navy or the Marines had agreed that I was on active duty when this occurred. And so they were sending me to Bethesda. And about 5 o'clock, a gray U.S. Navy ambulance shows up and picks me up and took me on the hour drive up to Bethesda, which was much better. And
what a striking name for the doctor. I mean, you were kind of in that.
Right.
I mean, personally.
And then the doctors that did operate on me 5 days later, because they had to wait for swelling to go down, were or identified themselves. This wasn't their true names, but they identified themselves as Dr. Patch and Dr. Alter.
Yeah, the verb of their last name, what they do. That's right. Good.
All right. So this afternoon, we're going to hear from Dr. Jerry Wright, who wrote this book, A Mystical Path Less Traveled. I did not mark well where we stopped last week, but I turned to the page that opened up, and there's a quote here from Dr. Wright's journal, which is apropos probably, so I'm going to read that. So I'm on page 30 of Dr. Wright's book. The body is the first responder to the nearness of the numinous, the sacred, or the mystical other. The mystical experience is first of all a bodily event, followed by an emotion, and concluding with a mental acknowledgement or interpretation. Yet monotheistic religions have tended to deny the importance of the body, and more severely to denigrate and pathologize its natural sexual instincts and expressions. In doing so, the body has been seen as an enemy to the experiences of the holy rather than its closest friend. The mystic honors the body as the first detector and responder to the sacred, embraces psyche as the organ of relationship with the sacred, and experiences oneself as the responsible incarnation of the sacred. A grounded, embodied mystical path replaces religious highways to heaven that seek to bypass the body and the earth. Okay. Well, I can assure you that my body was the first responder in that case, and absolutely.
And it wasn't until the third responder, the ambulance. So.
Right. Yeah, it was quite an experience. Okay, moving on. So the next topic in Diane Croft's book is called Coronation, and the poem reads. Pull down the heavy ropes, hoist up the flags, run to the top of the mountain, blast solid brass horns, pick a peach and wear the pit around your neck. You are tumbling down around the soul, must make merry. Make a cry that can be heard by sleeping donkeys. This is the life where you met your beloved. Make crazy waves with your trembling hands. Let the tremors alter the discourse of your life. And so the image is called Coronation of Ferdinando de Agonia Se, Musici, 15th century. Sorry, I'm not a terrific reader of Italian, but that's the image. So somebody blowing the horns, and that's by Benedetto da Miano, Italian sculptor. Photo by Spiros, 2006. The quote, to establish a mystical consciousness within the collective is a dream that belongs to idiots and fools of God. Llewellyn Vaughan Lee, The Signs of God. Let me read that again for you from The Signs of God. To establish a mystical consciousness within the collective is a dream that belongs to idiots and fools of God. Okay. And Diane's commentary, Coronation. There is a longing in you for ecstasy, says Robert Moore in his lecture on the archetype of initiation. Such longing will not be satisfied by the many temporary and external ways in which we attempt to satiate it. Alcohol and drugs, ecstasy, power, consumerism, sex, notoriety, etc. None of these offers the sustained and exalted rapture of an inner intercourse so vividly described by Christian, Hebrew, and Sufi mystics when they speak of an intimate relationship with the great living other. The Sufi tradition in particular is infused with eros. In the whole of the universe, there are only two, the lover and the beloved. One of the greatest of the Sufi poets, Jalal al-Din Rumi, effused, quote, "Lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along," unquote. Surprisingly, Jung wrote little about human love, perhaps because he sought to keep his own personal love transgressions private. But he described his experience of transpersonal love as an expression of divinity itself. Quote, "In my medical experience, as in my own life, I have again and again been faced with the mystery of love and have never been able to explain what it is. For we are in the deepest sense, the victims and instruments of cosmogonic love." I put that word in quotation marks to indicate that I do not use it in its connotations of desiring, preferring, favoring, wishing, and similar feelings, but as something superior to the individual, a unified and undivided whole. Okay, Jordan.
Question I have towards clarification, the last several words of the quote, belongs to idiots and fools of God. It feels like she means to, the quote means to say basically fools and sages, fools of God being a sage and idiots being the fool, so to speak. So it feels like that quote does imply a run from top to bottom of that spectrum. Thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I had my focus somewhere else. Ask your question again.
Yeah, sure. The last several words of that quote, belongs to idiots and fools of God. It feels like the belongs to idiots is the fool or a fool. And then fools of God would be sages, mystics,
Yeah.
wise people. And so the spectrum, I think, is called out from fool to sage in that quote.
I think this relates to when Jung was asked whether he believes in God, and he says, "I have no need to believe, I know."
Mm-hmm.
And sages know. And what I have learned after long experience, I broke my leg 30 years ago, or 31 years ago, is that if I keep putting ideas into the emptiness between them then and now, obviously, when I was lying there on the parking lot, I felt stupid and really had no idea what the next 15 minutes would be like. And so I felt quite empty and knew that that was likely the end of my Marine Corps career right there. And as I've, over the last 30 years, put meaning into it, I can say that God whop, said, no, I don't want you to do that. And instead has me doing this. And so when you have a connection with the self, then you can give meaning to your life. But as long as you're striving, and I did a lot of striving, I survived Vietnam. I went to law school and business school and practiced law for 5 years. All that striving was like a hamster in a spinning whirligig, right? But when I broke my leg, I became much more thoughtful, and that made all the difference in building what became a public company over the next 15 years. And so these things happen to us because God works in mysterious ways, and it's a very good thing to be able to recognize that and know how that works, I guess. And so, Jung obviously knew, and I've come to realize that there's a difference between belief and faith. And so in belief, I have to follow someone else's teachings. I have to read somebody else's books, whatever it is, whether it's a Marine Corps manual or the Holy Bible. I have to read it and understand it, and but I haven't taken it in necessarily. But with faith, one knows that a solution will emerge. And so in The Sound of Music, the best line in the movie is when the Mother Superior says to Maria, when God closes a door, he opens a window. And that's what we all must remember, that no matter how bad life gets, something new will emerge to give it meaning and purpose. And so, it can get pretty tough, as some of the viewers on YouTube clearly know. I'm not going to go into it further than that, but life can get pretty tough, and you just have to know that no matter how hard it gets, something will emerge from that into something new for your life. And so I have complete faith in that. I don't believe, and you'll hear Jerry Wright this afternoon talking about how he says explicitly, no, I don't believe in that kind of God anymore. And this is a man who served, I think, about 40 years in the Presbyterian pulpit. But I'm sure he has faith, okay? And that's a different topic entirely. So go ahead, Jordan.
I was going to say, to keep the theme, your foot and the dislocated shoulder really it's running a nice golden thread through the text, because the lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along. And when you said whack, God, gave you that, to me, your self stopped playing hide and seek. You were the narcotic of focus. You were so single-minded on what you're doing that there's a meditation level connection to something so specific that you're the nucleus in there. But then that, in a sense, took your body out of the equation.
Yep.
And then yourself comes up, stops playing hide and seek, and puts your body right back in the equation. Just, hello, yourself says.
Yes, and I've had now 31 years to meditate on the topic.
Nice.
And on the YouTube channel, the Big Cat says, abandoned. Does anyone else feel abandoned by God? I'm sure 99.9% of everybody feels abandoned by God. And And
Well, what did
we
Steve
have to have
Buscemi?
faith. Pardon?
Steve Buscemi defined that. He goes, God is that adult version of the Easter Bunny that you pray to for things, except when you really need him to look up, he's the one that ignores you. So,
well, we had an interesting case in point during our advanced reading group on January the 6th, when we were reading along, and my wife came in halfway through our session with the headlines and put the headlines down in front of me about what was happening at the Capitol. And immediately there was great angst and concern among the group. And the only one that didn't get concerned really and just kept plowing along was me. And the reason is that I have faith, great faith, in what the founding fathers created and what has been created over 240 some years. And so it didn't even occur to me that there was a serious problem about a coup in the United States. That never even came to my mind. But some of the group were quite anxious about it. And so I was able to smooth their fears, but there's still a lot of anxiety out there, of course. But that's the difference between belief and faith. If you know, as Dr. Jung said, I have no need to believe, I know. And when I heard that the first time, I said, I know too, but what is it I know? It took me another 10 years to work it out in meditation. So,
well, and to Big Cat, I didn't mean to be blithe or flippant, quippy with my response, and I think a response with a little more depth, directly speaking to, do you feel abandoned by God or your God? Something that gives me solace in that kind of arena is just simply the phrase, the teacher is always silent during the test.
Yeah. So the Big Cat asks another poignant question, which is, how can you know if you feel abandoned? And the answer to that is that you have to believe until you know. And that's an unfortunate truth. So you can, you can lose your mind, but as chaos emerges around you, you can be losing your mind, but you have to be the one that keeps your head. And a numinous experience will come to you, and then you will know. And it's not pretty. I'm not suggesting that, you can be in the horrors of your life, whatever they may be, and all of a sudden God's going to come and touch you. But at the same time, that's what I am telling you from my experience. And probably Jordan would tell you from his experience too, that when it happens, you will know. And until then, you have to pick a path, any path, and follow it until it happens. And it's as simple as watching The Sound of Music and hearing the Mother Superior say, when God closes a door, he opens a window. And that line from that movie has been ringing in my ears for 60 years probably. But at the same time, now I know what she meant. And obviously a lot of movie writers know those things as well, because they put them in movies so that we can all hear them. And the answer will come to you. It may come to you in a movie. It will come to you in a book. For the longest time, I was trying to understand Dr. Jung's comment that what is your spiritual practice? And he said, underlining books. And of course, that's my path too, although I didn't consider it a spiritual path. But a couple of years back, I started to realize that when I read a book and underline important passages in it, it's causing me to meditate on that passage. And so I meditate on lots of passages. And so if you ever had one of my books, you would see the things that I thought were important and underlined. And so you might consider starting to underline books, and especially all kinds of sacred books or books by numinous psychologists like C.G. Jung. Okay, so I'm going to go on with Jerry Wright's book now. And this is a journal entry again.
If I may quickly, the abandonment word or abandoned, it's one of the strongest charged words in the English vocabulary.
Sure.
And it, not to go into psychology about it, but it has so many forms and so many enactments. And I'll say, when I basically, to take the mistake or the accident out of it, if I say, I cast myself down the spree field of the north face of Mount Democrat, instead of saying I slipped, then I was abandoning myself. I was casting myself off. And when I found life and death, certain death at a point far below, the word abandonment, that concept came up, and it caused me to stop crying, in that I'm wasting water. And instead of that, I realized, abandonment is you have been born, but the placenta is still connected. Life's going on and they've moved around, but you're still got this cord. And in my mind, all I said is, no, I'm not abandoned. This is exile. I'm now in a new place. And so that cut that cord. Yeah. And so if that does a service to help to, it sounds cliche, be where you are, Jung's eternal moment.
So the Big Cat says, I've read thousands of books. Well, all I can respond to that is maybe you've read the wrong books, and or the wrong book, the right books at the wrong time, which is also possible. But I would really, really urge you to read this book, The Mystical Path Less Traveled, because it puts it in context in a logos kind of way. And The Unseen Partner by Diane Croft puts this entirely in an eros sort of way. So we have the paired ways of being in the world. And you have to get into life. You have to be in life. And you just have to pick the right book. We can't, and it has to be the right book at the right time also. And so I can't tell you what book is going to be meaningful to you. I can tell you what books have been meaningful to me. And I've started to read The Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence on this YouTube channel. I only did the first session day before yesterday. But that is a quite meaningful book to me, because in the process of reading that book, I realized that I have lived it. And if you think that your life is chaotic, imagine what T.E. Lawrence's life was like. In my view, he was the most effective serving officer in any army in World War I. Okay, I can say that unequivocally. And he was, when he started, he was a 28-year-old first lieutenant. When he finished 2 years later, he was a 30-year-old colonel in the British Army. And what he did was to enter into something that was total chaos, total chaos. He went in with the Bedouins, who had been warring with one another over wells for thousands of years, literally thousands of years, in tribes, and killing one another over access to water. And there were, as he describes it in the book, there were at least 30 different interest groups involved, and they were all warring. And he was able, over a 2-year period, to pull them all together and cause them to serve as the right flank of the British Army that was attacking the Ottoman Empire. And meanwhile, the officer, I guess it was General Chauvel, who was commanding the left flank or the center, I don't know which, when he came into Damascus at the end of the war, he had 40,000 horses, 40,000 horses that he had to find forage for. And Lawrence was able to do what he did with 1,000 men and 1,000 camels. And so, and first he had to pull them together and to get them all working together for that 2-year period, which he did. Now, he was a magician, okay, a magician in the tarot sense, the first card of the major arcana. He was a magician, and by his magic, he was able to hold them together over that 2-year period. But as you see at the end of the movie, when he's departing, the chaos has returned. It's like Moses. He spread the waters and went through and did what had to be done. And then when he left the split, it closed in behind him, and the chaos remained. And 100 years later, those were Hashemite Bedouins who he was working with. Those Hashemite Bedouins are today Jordanians. And 2 weeks ago, one of King Abdullah's brothers attempted to overthrow him in a coup d'etat. And so nothing's changed in 100 years. And yet that's the way it is. So let's see.
I think the 1,000 books comment too from Big Cat. I would suggest pick one book and write in it, underline, because I find there's certain presenteeism when you just read a book. Now, I will be honest, I haven't touched Diane Croft's book yet, and don't know that I necessarily will yet. But when you write in a book, you engage it, and not just in a dance. You're actually ingesting it by interacting with it, and you're embellishing your body with actions, I think is the one previous page.
And the Big Cat says he saw the movie of Lawrence of Arabia, never read the book. Well, what I would say is I saw the movie first time in 1961, one block from the Cathedral of Yokohama that was still in rubble from World War II. And I remember clearly walking out of that theater that night and walking past and meditating on the significance of that rubble that was sitting there. And in the last 2 weeks, as I've been rereading the book for the second time, I have watched the movie again 3 times, and here's my book. Okay, this is my second reading, and if you look at the pages, every page, and as you see, I have lots of tabs. It's those tabs that I'm going to be reading from into the YouTube channel because they make certain points that I want to make. But I'm going to be making a gift of this book to a friend sometime soon. And then I'll probably read it again at some point. It never gets old. And if you can read a book like this and see all the blood and gore and still see yourself in it, I didn't live most of my experience, which was like Lawrence's, was not during wartime, although I did have an experience of wartime and battle, but nothing like his. I would be a piker compared to him as a soldier, but in terms of his wisdom and the way he thought about these issues as he went forward is just beyond compare. And so,
and with poetry, I mean,
and with poetry, and it was quite poetic. And if in 1994, my wife sent me a fax saying she had found the book that she would be happy with if it was the only book she had on a desert island where she was set aside, or where she was left. And the book that she was reading at that time and still reads is the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And in fact, she's a leading Buddhist teacher in the Washington area right now. And and Dr. Jung's psychology is the logos analog to Tibetan Buddhism, believe it or not. And he felt so and said so during his lifetime. But for me, as I look at 7 Pillars of Wisdom, I would say I would be more than happy to be on a desert island with only the 7 Pillars of Wisdom for the rest of my life, no doubt. So let's see. The Big Cat says, I think my abandonment is more like Jesus on the cross as he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? Books provide no solace anymore. Then maybe you need to go take yin yoga or something like that at the local gym. If books don't do it for you, and if the 7 Pillars of Wisdom don't do it for you, then I would say you could give up on books and follow a different path. It will happen for you, and you'll recognize it because we've talked about it and you've now cogitated on it through your mind. So when it happens, you will recognize it, I'm quite sure. And he says, not that I am Jesus or even a good person, but that is the depth of it. Well, sure. And all of us feel abandoned by our Father at some point of time. Jesus's calling was to serve as the Son of God and to pass a certain message. And as Dr. Jung said during his lifetime, what happened to Jesus was only possible for this one man, Jesus. It was not possible for anyone else. It had to be the confluence of all the forces that came together in his life during his lifetime. And he made his experiment. We all have to make our experiment into life, and we have to be broken by it. as Dr. Jung said, life has to be undone. In other words, an acorn doesn't stay an acorn. It has to be undone and become a oak tree. And all of us have to do that. And so first, understanding that at a conscious logos level is all well and good, but then you have to grok it. You have to grok it, and you can't grok it until you live it. And I have no doubt that you've lived it, and others that are here listening have lived it. That's certain. You've all lived being undone in your life, but you're, as long as you live, as long as you can move your big toe, you can do something. I mean, that's what Daniel Day-Lewis's movie My Left Foot is about. Who, that character that he played and for which he won the Academy Award was totally paralyzed, and the only thing he could move was his left foot, and yet he became a recognized artist and lived a full life. And even with that kind of handicap, we all have that kind of handicap, if not physically, then metaphorically, and we have to be able to live through it, and that's what it's about.
What is Picasso's quote? I think it may have been Picasso: "Inspiration will find you working."
Yeah, and God did find Christ. Christ ultimately did die after having been abandoned by God. God came back and brought him into heaven and made him immortal. And so there's no question that Jesus Christ is immortal, because we're talking about him right now, and his spirit does live. Estelle says, as remedial as this may sound, I think I could be left alone on an island with the book The Giving Tree. Okay, good pointer. I haven't read The Giving Tree, but I'm sure that also would help. And it's not that I say any specific thing, but the two books that we're currently reading are extremely powerful, and I would urge you to read them. They're The Mystical Path Less Travel and The Unseen Partner. And today, again, I repeat, today you have the opportunity to see and hear Jerry Wright in person, ask him questions, whatever. And so if you go to the top of the YouTube chat, you'll find the link to put yourself on our mailing list, so you'll have the notices of when he's there. And I won't be sending another notice before his appearance, so you can always write me an email, skip.conover@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to send you the link for today. All right, so going back to the mystical path, whatever we attribute to creation's source, whether theological, psychological, or scientific, it has taken up residence within matter, within physical life. This source is so intertwined with matter, molecules, and human flesh as having no separate operational headquarters. The human body is the first responder of our species to the mysteries at the heart of life. As part of the earth itself, the body is the finest tuned mystical instrument available to us. Those religions that deny or denigrate the value of the body, including sexuality, and elevate heaven over earth, are a danger to body and soul. The following 3 trail markers address such dangers. Now, the trail markers are poems that Dr. Wright wrote, and I made a promise to him that I would not read his poetry. So I've not done that. And he will be reading his poetry today. So I urge you to come and listen to that this afternoon. Okay. So I'm going to go back to The Unseen Partner by Diane Croft. And the next topic that she covers, which is on page 64, is the Chariot. And of course, the Chariot is a card in the major arcana of the Tarot as well. And here's her poem. I heard the call of the beloved and he smote me. I drove a chariot and whipped the horse. I became an idiot, drooled and babbled. He lifted the veil and kissed me. I shuddered and gasped for air. There is no breathing this love madness. And the image is the chariot. It's a stone relief from the temple in Belur Helibid, India, photo by Endymion, 2006. Here's the photo of the person on the chariot. But you can also pick up any tarot deck whatsoever and find the chariot, and I'm sure that the teaching will be the same. Okay, here's the quote. I know well, O highest wisdom, that if I am mad, it is your doing. And that was by Jacopone da Todi in the 13th century. He was a Franciscan monk. And here's Diane's commentary. The Chariot. I discovered this energetic stone relief carved in soapstone on the walls of a 12th century Hindu temple. By choosing the word chariot as the dominant image in the poem, unbeknownst to me until I began to explore its symbolic meaning, the chariot is the seventh trump card in the tarot deck and may be characterized as one of conquest. It represents a battle that can be won if the querent, one who seeks, has the willpower for it. The seeds represent powerful forces, internal and external, that need to be controlled to achieve the goal. It seems I have connected with some powerful lover, warrior, and royal energies, all inferior functions for me. But looking more carefully at the language, it's a tenuous hold indeed. I'm drooling and babbling. My connection with this newly discovered energy is clearly in its infancy, but the veil has been lifted, and ready or not, a guiding force in the psyche has been unleashed. I can barely catch my breath, and I'm warning of breathing in too much at once. And I'm warned of breathing in too much at once. A chariot joyride across the heavens cast Phaeton into the sea, where he drowned. Jung advised the chariot, quote, should be brought to dry land, unquote, which I take to mean these energies need to be grounded in ego consciousness to avoid hubris and to manage the warring archetypal energies within. Imagine my surprise when I discovered this reference in the Hindu scriptures, Katha Upanishad, quote, know the self to be the master of the chariot and the body to be the chariot. Know the intellect to be the charioteer and the mind to be the reins. I'll read that once again from the Katha Upanishad. Know the self to be the master of the chariot and the body to be the chariot. Know the intellect to be the charioteer and the mind to be the reins. Okay, what a terrific statement this is, especially for someone who is not familiar with the tarot. And Jordan Hoggard and I have been working heavily on the tarot in this YouTube channel for the last 6 or 8 months, many weeks. And we've done 2-hour sessions on it. And I can say that I learned from our group, possibly from Jordan himself, that the chariot in the tarot isn't moving. It's actually concrete. And the point is that the chariot is us, and we have to learn how to control that chariot and control the opposites that are within us. And so, Jordan, are you still here? Do you want? Okay, Jordan missed the opportunity, I guess. Okay, I'll come back to Jordan in a moment. Okay, so going on to one of Jerry Wright's journal entries. In this postmodern world, we must treat deities as psychological creations rather than as a priori external, supernatural, interventionist entities. Theistic religions are essentially dualistic, dividing human and divine, heaven and earth, and body and spirit. The three major monotheistic religions create additional pathologies. Indeed, the narcissism of being the chosen of the one and only God, followed by tribalism of us versus them, as well as escapism in the form of scapegoating and salvation from beyond. Theistic and monotheistic God images are childish at best and pathological at worst. And so what I would say to this is that, first of all, what is a neurosis? Well, there's a difference between psychosis, which is a mental disease or defect, and neurosis, which is being pulled by the opposites. And what must be learned is that you can't cure a neurosis. In other words, the battle between red and blue in the United States, which is obviously a horrific factor that's trying to tear our country apart, that cannot be cured. What we have to do is we have to put a fence around it and mature past it and leave it over on the side, knowing that these energies exist, but we have to go on with the further development of the country. It's a stage of consciousness that we haven't achieved yet, obviously, in the United States, but for my lights, we have the best chance of achieving it here as opposed to anywhere else, because we see that in every country where there are opposites, usually there are authoritarian leaders who are controlling their people, and then the people who are controlled. That too is dualistic, and so that, you know, literally it's crazy. You can't, we can't live that way as human beings, and we keep trying to. We've done it through many wars and many religious wars too, but we can never get there as long as it's my way or the highway. We have to understand that all paths are valid paths to get to the one, and the one is in all. The Indian philosophies are far ahead of us in this respect, because if you read the Bhagavad Gita, which had its origins at least 5,000 years ago and was finally written down in a formal way about 2,000 years ago, in the Bhagavad Gita, you can see that these powers were well understood even 5,000 years ago in the subcontinent. And so we, in terms of our psychological development, are far behind that psychological development, and our religions are such. And so Jerry is, having served in a pulpit for quite a while, has called that out and said quite clearly, and I'm going to read his journal entry once again because it's so powerful. In this postmodern world, we must treat deities as psychological creations rather than as a priori external, supernatural, interventionist entities. Theistic religions are essentially dualistic, dividing human and divine, heaven and earth, and body and spirit. The three major monotheistic religions create additional pathology, including the narcissism of being the chosen of a one and only God, followed by tribalism of us versus them, as well as escapism in the form of scapegoating and salvation from beyond. Theistic and monotheistic God images are childish at best and pathological at worst. And boy, that's probably the most profound thing that's in the book so far, although I have to admit that I haven't read his poetry. And so, Jordan, while you were away, I read The Chariot from Diane's book. And I wanted to know if you wanted to make a comment on that, since Diane does expressly talk about the Tarot here and the chariot in the Tarot.
I think she really says it in her poem, primarily, especially when I drove a chariot and whipped the horse. I became an idiot, drooled and babbled. And there's that idiot. And then he lifted the veil and kissed me. I shuddered and gasped for air. There is no breathing this love madness. And that's the fool of God. And I think in that's the chariot, which is the harnessing of opposing forces in one vehicle. I need to read the other paragraph, but I feel that she really expressed the chariot and nailed it in those two passages.
Right. And did you hear what I read of Jerry's book, the journal entry? Just now?
Right at the last part.
All right, let me read it again because you need to hear it. In this postmodern world, we must treat deities as psychological creations rather than as a priori external, supernatural, interventionist entities. Theistic religions are essentially dualistic, dividing human and divine, heaven and earth, and body and spirit. The three major monotheistic religions create additional pathology, including the narcissism of being the chosen of a one and only God, followed by tribalism of us versus them, as well as escapism in the form of scapegoating and salvation from beyond. Theistic and monotheistic God images are childish at best and pathological at worst.
Yes, that I'm glad. Thank you for resharing that so I could hear that. That goes right with Diane's work. And one word I would use to describe all of it is centaur, the half horse, half man, because no saddle, no bridle. The beast is, or the divine is saddled in the beast, the body in the horse. And that's a chariot of a being, completely unique being. But that, especially that last part with Jerry, it really expresses the severity and the intensity. And I think it even would speak to Big Cat's level of the abandon quality, where it's not messy. Mm-hmm. When I said exile, and I was in a new place and I'm present, well, that's the vanilla ice cream pretty version, but the word distraught would not cover it. It was messy. It was dirty. It was actually ugly, but so purely ugly towards death that it was a thing of beauty.
Yeah. So Mistel makes a great comment here. She says, gathering birth charts of those around me on my path has been one of the most useful tools to understand the path I am trying to navigate. And I think that's a wonderful comment, Mistel, because you're talking about astrology, of course. And of course, people like Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson poo-poo things like astrology. But of course, when you're doing that, when you're gathering birth charts, you are in fact meditating on what you see there. And the same applies to the tarot. The tarot is a wisdom path for life, and it's a roadmap for life. And if you were to understand each card deeply, as we're trying to do on our Monday night sessions, that those sessions are a kind of meditation for the group, and each one of them and each one of those sessions is a deep meditative experience for all of us. And so, I use many methods, but, underlining books is one of them. But the tarot also is a deep meditative experience, and so is astrology. And they're all every bit as valid as the monotheistic religions, which unfortunately, I think Dr. Jerry Wright nailed it. They're not, there's no Geppetto up there pulling your strings. If you pray to God to give you this or that, it ain't coming unless you have gotten through to yourself, and yourself makes you do the things. This is why I always point out that the football player running across the goal line and pointing up to God is pointing in the wrong direction, because the God that got him across that goal line is here in his heart. It's not up there. And it's the God that got him in the gym every day for the last 10 years and made him learn all the tactics of the game of football, and so on. But there's no Geppetto that's going to pick you up and carry you across the goal. That ain't happening. And we have to understand that.
Well, in the that whole piece there, I think it was mentioned before in Diane's book, to embellish the body with action. And that's where the ground you walk on, or in that case, run towards the end zone on, is as inspirational as the stars in your sky. Sure. And with Mistel too, I love the collect birth charts you said, and I do that. And what I also find is I often will do a synastry chart. A lot of people only do synastry charts for lovers or people who they are interested in. And I find, as an astrologer myself, I'll do a synastry chart because it'll show potential hurdles, and it'll also show best course of how we respond together and interact. So maybe if you don't do that already, maybe give that a shot. Astro.com has free charts you can use.
Yeah. So Mistel also says, along with tarot as my GPS, it's become a tangible map. I've watched the session. I don't always present myself. Too many trolls follow me. Mistel, I would say that if a troll is making a problem for you on any of my sessions, please bring that to my attention, because I have air marshals on the YouTube channel, and I myself will
and they're good.
Will cancel them. And when I cancel somebody, I cancel them permanently. I don't dilly-dally around on it. And the reason is that if people need to do that sort of thing as part of their individuation, then they need to do it someplace else, because I am intolerant of that. the big cat says it's difficult for people to take tarot, astrology, religions seriously, but not literally. Well, that's the way they've sold it for the last 2,000 years. And we're gradually breaking away from that, is what I can say. And it's going to be a long and painful process, because the Abrahamic religions were developed for early Iron Age men, and primarily men. And they were what the intermediaries between the god and the human could sell to the public, and they became concretized in dogma and so on. And so few people questioned it. And of course, the church, the Catholic Church used the Inquisition to actually murder people who were questioning it. And we have to grow out of that. Okay, that's neurosis carried to the crazy extent that it has been carried. Certainly, I'm physically here in the United States and American because my Dutch ancestors were escaping the 80 Years' War between Holland and Spain. And the way that worked is the Spanish Catholics came up to Holland every summer to beat the Dutch back into the Catholic Church. And the Dutch fought them all summer while the crops were growing. And then they flooded their country at the end of the summer, and the Spanish Catholics went home to sunny Spain for the winter. And that happened time and time and time again, 80 years worth, until finally the Treaty of Westphalia ended it. And so we have grown past that. Today, many of my best friends are Catholics, and I live in a state that was founded by Catholics. The state of Maryland was founded by Catholics who were asked to leave England by James I because they were causing a ruckus with the Anglicans or the Episcopal Church. And so he called up Lord Baltimore one day and said, "Take your Catholics, I have this colony in the New World, it's called Mary's Land, and you can take your people there." And so Lord Calvert arranged for that. He never physically came to the New World, but he was Lord Baltimore, and for whom our city is named. And as a result of that, there was a Catholic colony here. And so in my city, which is Annapolis, we have the first Catholic congregation continuously operated in the United States. And meanwhile, we have one of the earliest Church of England or Episcopal churches also here, even closer to the capital. And in that church, they have communion chalices that were loaned from the crown jewels of England. And on that church's books and records, it's still carried as on loan from the British Crown. However, since the Revolution, nobody's really thought to give them back. They're so precious that they have to be kept in a vault in the church, because they're priceless and cannot be insured properly. And so the church had to build a vault in the church to put them away when they're not being used.
You know, that to speak to the depth of how ingrained it is in our culture, that tarot hardly can be taken seriously or literally, both. I'm a professional tarot reader, author, and astrologer. And even there was a point in my career, maybe 15 years ago, and even again 10 years ago, where I actually thought, well, this isn't a real job. And it was putting a roof over my head. But I still, it's like, what is that thought? I am doing this as a professional, and I still had that thought fly through. And that speaks to the power of how much that was ingrained just in my structure of how I was brought up. And it's hard to shake that. It's really hard to shake that.
Yeah. So the big cat says, I was raised Catholic and agree with just about everything about the Catholic Church, but the Protestants were just as nutty and evil. Not sure who was worse. Well, precisely because we've been living through a religious pathology that has gone on for 2,000 years. And finally, Jerry Wright has called that out. And because he's called that out, and this program is now being broadcast around the world and will be on replay, more and more people will become conscious of this fact. And as more and more consciousness comes, people will wise up. And so the issue is that the churches the Christian churches at least, have been pointing back to the Pentecost, which was this numinous moment in Christian history among the 12 disciples and the Virgin Mary, or Mary, Mother of God, I guess, who had a numinous experience of the return of Christ. And that was 2,000 years ago. And Dr. Jung made the observation that we keep pointing back to the Pentecostal events and not looking forward to where the Spirit is taking us. And that's the issue. The Spirit, the human spirit, and the Holy Spirit is taking our species as a whole someplace. And it's incumbent on all of us to understand and grok that fact, and then try to guide our fellow men into a way that we can all live together on one very limited planet. And that's no longer a question of tribalism. That's a question of seeing something bigger and getting to it. All right, so
yeah, the megalopolis is the world as a human community.
Right, and yeah, Miles says Titanic sunk on April the 15th, for example. Anyone think about Skip having said we all better all get along? Well, obviously on a ship you have to all get along. and somebody has to be the captain, and you can be a passenger, but you're all going to go down with the ship if we don't fix it. There are no lifeboats. As far as we know, there are no lifeboats as yet off of the Earth.
And there are plenty of icebergs, though.
Yeah. And so the big cat says it's totally fascinating that there are 30,000 sects of Christianity arguing over single words in the Bible. Yep, we have to get beyond that because that wasn't the teaching. So I want to move on now. So return home is the next topic in Diane's book. And she said, I followed the footprints in front of me until they disappeared. I continued until I came upon a set of prints approaching mine. This is reminiscent of the session my wife did with us entitled The Vanishing Path. So if you find that video on the YouTube channel, The Vanishing Path, you can hear what my wife, who is everything but ordained a Buddhist teacher, you will find that session profound. And the image that Diane has selected here in her book, let's see if I can get it. Okay. It's Buddha's footprint. And this is in a place in Thailand, which I can never pronounce Thai words, but it's Gishit Spark Sukat Thai in Thailand, and photo by Heinrich Dahm, 2004. So it's the Buddha's footprint. And
her verse reminds me of the story of the hermit, the short story in the tarot, where the hermit's first step, he looks into the mud, or she looks into the mud, and then steps deep into the mud and stands, and then begins the passage, the walk. And after a long time, the hermit comes back and sees this strange pair of footprints, but now they're not mud. They've hardened into basically concrete earth. And then the hermit realizes, those were my first steps, and then steps into the shoes the earth has formed from the previous steps, which completes the cycle. And that she runs that, where until I came upon a set of prints approaching mine, they were hers.
right. Okay, so this, just as a reminder for everyone what the poem was, I'll read her poem again. I followed the footprints in front of me until they disappeared. I continued until I came upon a set of prints approaching mine. And Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching says, thus the master travels all day without leaving home. And Diane's commentary, Return Home. The value of myths and fairy tales, increasingly a lost art in the collective culture, is the magical way in which they depict timeless archetypal events. Typically, the hero's journey begins by leaving home, the first step in the process of separation from the collective, i.e., family, home, tribe, community. Trials and tribulations test the hero's heart, courage, and integrity. If the hero, representing phallic energies in both men and women, prevails against the forces of good and evil, the opposites, the monster, powerful irrational forces in the unconscious, is overcome, and the initiate returns home with a new orientation to life. Generally, there is a period of being lost in the woods where no tracks point the way out, and a child or helpful animal, our instinctual nature, offers assistance. It is thought the childlike or primitive aspects of our nature that we reconnect to the self and heal our condition of alienation. This is the point of being met by an autonomous spirit that guides, instructs, and eventually leads one home, back to reality. If one ignores the warnings or instructions given by non-human unconscious entities, elf, troll, frog, bird, along the way, the prize is lost. Edinger makes a similar point about an ego self-encounter when he restates Jung's psychological rule. Quote, the unconscious takes the same attitude toward the ego as the ego takes toward it. If one pays friendly attention to the unconscious, it becomes helpful to the ego. The ego needs the guidance and direction of the unconscious to have a meaningful life. This wonderful quote from the Tao reminds us that this part of the journey takes place inside ourselves within the greater psyche. And so again, I would point back to 7 Pillars of Wisdom, in which T.E. Lawrence definitely went through a very significant period of individuation during World War I, and all of these phases that Diane discusses here are represented in the book, and so I urge you to read it. It's tough going, and especially for women, it may be tough going, although it may be a compensation. The reason I say that is that there's a lot of very difficult decisions that he has to make, and lots of blood and guts. And, women may not have had an experience like that. It's possible. And so it may be tough, but on the other hand, it may be a compensation. In other words, your psyche may not have had enough experience on that side of the ledger. And, I just point to the 1,000-yard stare that many soldiers come back with, and we still lose about 22 men a day to suicide who have been in battle. And, this is because of what they encounter on the battlefield. And so when you ask, I've often heard from women that dear old dad never talked much about the war. The point is that how do you talk about something like that? It's you can't bring it back into civilization. You have to learn from it and move on. And the same was true of my father-in-law, who was he was a sailor during World War II, and he was on many convoy duty that were sitting ducks for German U-boats for 2 years. And when he returned, he couldn't say anything to his future wife or anybody else about it until I came along. And then when I joined the family, he and I could talk about his war experiences. And my mother-in-law and my wife, commented that they'd never been able to get dad to talk about his experiences in the war. And, that's why, because those experiences are so entirely horrific that you wouldn't want to repeat them. And so, I don't recommend the 7 Pillars of Wisdom because it's easy going. It's not easy going, but it is what we human beings have got to get past in order to survive as a species, very simply. And so the big cat says, what if the hero fails? Well, lots of heroes fail. We have to hope that enough of them survive, that our species survives. And then
heroes also make diamonds out of misfortune. So often the failure is not present. It's an opportunity for learning. They're going to continue until they're not living.
Right. The big cat says soldiers encounter the depths of the horror. Well, yes. And my point is that all of us live in chaos, and certainly what T.E. Lawrence entered when he went out to Prince Faisal was literally chaos, more than almost any human being faces in a lifetime. And we have to take from that enough meaning and direction, logos. Chaos is eros. Okay, the chaos is in the eros, and one needs to apply enough logos to it to make chicken salad out of chicken shit, basically, right? And
well,
and so we all face chaos. This is my little red ball again. We all have to be able to step away from the chaos and look back at it and apply some logos to it, and then build a life. And that's what T.E. Lawrence did, except he built an army, literally, and he was more than a general or a field marshal. He was somebody, as he said, he had no authority, he had no official position in the Bedouin army, but he was able, as the artist, to pull the chaos together and to make it work in a certain way for a certain period of time. In that case, it was a very difficult thing to do. He kept his wits about him well enough that he could write the 7 Pillars of Wisdom twice, because he first wrote it during the Versailles Peace Conference, and his notes and draft were lost, so he had to write it a second time. He kept his wits about him for that, but in the end, I think we would have to say that he was a broken man in some ways, but he knew what he had done, and it was only important that he knew. And not only did he know, but he shared it with us so the rest of us can know too.
Your wonderful salad example, it beyond hilarious. It reminds me of the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad.
Yeah. And the big cat says Lawrence was attracted to chaos. And the truth is we all are, okay? We fall into life in total chaos, okay? We are wild animals when we're born, and it's total chaos around us. And we all have to do what Lawrence did, which is to make chicken salad out of chicken shit. And so all of us have to do that. That's what individuation is about. And his example is simply a much more colorful example, but it is a profound book. And so anyway, going on, I need to read at least one more Jerry Wright segment. Okay. Gods are perceived to be external, supernatural, metaphysical beings, quickly become literalized, domesticized, commercialized, and finally weaponized with dogma, politics, and armaments. Phrases like my God or our God reveal an attitude of possession. It is not possible to worship or trust a God one possesses or owns. The familiar proclamations "In God we trust" and "God bless America" too often mean our God is number one and so are we. Because our country was founded on God and by God, we are the favored nation, and by God, we plan to keep it that way. And, that's the point. Take it for what it's worth. Once our God is the right God and your God is the wrong God, there's the problem right there. We have to understand what God is. God is not that kindly Geppetto that you're praying to up there in the sky. God is something much deeper, as Dr. Jung explained it in his letter to David Cox, which I've read on this channel as part of the New God Image by Edward Edinger playlist. God is the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious both. And if you understand that, then you understand what we're up against, okay? Because there is a truly frightening God that we need to understand, and understand what our contribution to the entire process of the evolution of God can be. And so that brings up Diane's next section, which is called Embodied. So that fits right in with my little homily there. So Diane's poem is, this love wants to be seen, known, shown, aware of itself, a spirit body. I'll read it once more. This love wants to be seen, known, shown, aware of itself, a spirit body. And I would only emphasize here that I hope you will go back and listen to Colleen Kiber's open studio that we did last Tuesday, where she was talking about exactly that, and how we are all creators, and we need to understand that we are creators and what is involved in that. And that session got a little bit disjointed, and so Colleen and I have since done a private interview where we put it all together. I've not yet edited that interview, but I will post it soon. And so the topic is embodied, and the image is a woodblock print from Faust I, Goethe. And
you just hit on what she said in the pit too, where the different attitude of the eternal womb, is it a devouring mother or a nourishing mother, in whichever way you take it.
okay, so anyway, that image is called Faust I, 1964, Margaret Hofheinz-Dering, from the gallery Brigitte Mauch in Germany. And the quote from Edward Edinger's Ego and Archetype: Sophia, the divine wisdom, descended into matter, became lost and imprisoned, thus becoming the hidden God, which is in need of release and redemption. And this is the point. Until we understand that, we aren't going to understand what God in fact is. Okay, Diane's commentary, embodied. Here we have another striking image, remarkably entitled Faust, from the artist Margaret Hofheinz-Dering. To me, the bird soaring in the left-hand corner signifies the dove of the Holy Spirit. The great living other wants to be seen, known, shown, aware of itself, but remains imprisoned inside matter, mind, and body. Nietzsche expressed this axiom in Zarathustra, quote, beyond your thoughts and feelings, my brother, there stands a mighty ruler, an unknown sage whose name is self. In your body, he dwells. He is your body, unquote. The self needs conscious realization, and the body is a portal for the experience of the self. The phrase, a spirit body, accords equal weight to both, whereas many religious traditions have relegated the body, matter, to a lower realm. We have severed the soft body of our animal nature, instincts, and its head, reason, from its transpersonal source, spirit. This was no doubt an important evolutionary step in the process of becoming civilized, but to evolve to a higher state, we are being asked to experience within us, as we relate to the world outside us, the interplay of mind, body, and spirit. Spirit needs reason and form, embodiment, in order to be known to the world, to be known in the world. And human beings need to reconnect with the autonomous spirit within in order to know and bring forth our own unique manifestation of the totality. Writes Edinger, without a conscious connection with the spirit, which brings about that reciprocal knowing and being known, the ego cannot survive. Thus, one definition for existence might be that the basis for life is being known by and knowing God, or in psychological terms, seeing and being seen by the self. Jung never solved the question, is the self a symbol of God or God a symbol of the self? Okay. Comments?
Very definitely the point where she says, from Zarathustra, in your body he dwells, he is your body. That's each and every one of us as the Holy Grail. The body is the vessel, and the self is what fills the sacred vessel. And I think that's so aptly put in so few words, with the body, in your body he dwells, semicolon, he is your body. And that's the both and of us as both container and contained at one and the same time, which Jung mentions a lot with his alchemical studies.
Right. And when in Jung's book, Answer to Job, which Dr. Edinger also points to, the very last paragraph where he said it leads to the Christification of many, he does not mean that many people will become Christian. He means that we are all the sons and daughters of God. All of us, not only Jesus Christ, every single one of us. And he, as a psychiatrist, knew that that could be problematic if we didn't understand that everybody is a manifestation of God. And,
right.
And it can't lead to inflations like we saw in the last president of the United States, because that would inevitably cause huge clashes, which it obviously did. And January 6th was a perfect example of that. And so we have to understand this point humbly, that we are the gods that our ancestors imagined, and we are the gods with the power to create and destroy ourselves entirely. And, you know, Edward Edinger said it very starkly. He said, ultimately, we will all be one thing, and we will either be destroyed or we will be one species on this limited blue dot that we live out in space. And on that matter, I agree with Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson. We live on a pale blue dot, and we have to learn to do that. Okay, so one last journal entry from Jerry Wright, and then we have to move on. So, unfortunately, monotheistic pathology does not stay contained in church, temple, and mosque. Like the deadly virus it spreads to cultures, politics, and individual attitudes toward others, beyond one's own tribe. The most effective treatment has proven to be the expansion of human consciousness in general and religious consciousness in particular. Adherence to religious dogma, including stating again and again that God is love, has not and will not be effective. That theological affirmation may be a childish wish, yet it is not borne out by our experience of that which we have named God, or the way we experience ourselves. So we have to understand ourselves and have greater consciousness. And this is why I have done this work for these many years. And we're almost up to the 5th anniversary of this YouTube channel. And we're moving toward the 11th anniversary of my website, archetypeinaction.com. And all of that has been aimed in one way or another toward expanding our consciousness. And so far it seems to be working. We'll see how we do over time, but who knows?
Well, the more pure for the positive you pour into even a sewage tank, after a while, if that's all you're pouring in, it's washed out the other stuff. So, little by little, step by step, and no worry about the end. You just, I guess those who have a how or a reason will always find a way. If you have it in your heart. So go ahead.
Yep, from Texas, but there is only one self enfolded into the fractal universe. Fair enough, that's the point, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And Miles says, my brother died in 1993, seems like a moment ago. I think of how blown away he would be by the magic tools I have access to, an iPad, YouTube, Google, etc. And what must I do with this magic? Well, that's the question, isn't it?
That's a great way to put that. What must I do with that magic?
And so the Big Cat says, Jerry Wright is very insightful, great passage. And what I would say is that, yes, both Jerry and Diane are great minds, and they have approached the problem that we face from the two directions. Diane's work is primarily of the Eros variety. Some of my followers have said Jerry's is on the Logos side, but I would simply say that Jerry's is also balanced between Logos and Eros, but Jerry asked me not to read his poetry, and so I have not done. So my readings of Dr. Wright's poetry have been one-sided, I admit that. And so they have been weighted on the Logos side. And so I urge you all to come and hear Dr. Wright read his own poetry today, which is what he wished. And I'll just give you I'll tantalize you a little. I'm not going to read the poetry, but I will give you the names of the poems. And so one poem it is named God, and it goes on for 5 pages. And then there are 3 others here that are quite important. One is Jesus, one is Mary, and one is Joseph, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. And so those are the names of the poems, and those 4 poems take up approximately 10 pages of this book. And I'm not going to read those to you, but you can hear Dr. Wright himself read them this afternoon at 2 p.m. And this being April the 18th, 2021, and at 2 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time, Dr. Wright will be with us live. and I urge you to be with us. And I'm going to once again put the link for our MailChimp list so that you can receive notices of these Wisdom Path and other events. And I urge you to register on that, because then you'll have that information. Now, I do try to limit my emails to, once or at the most twice a week. That's very difficult to do because the variety of what I send out is quite extensive. So some of you may sign up for more than one list, for example, in which case you may be getting more than one email from me, depending on what you want to hear about. And but I do try to keep the number of announcements down. So yesterday was my last announcement before Jerry Wright appears. But if you are hearing this, if you are hearing this now and you are not on the list and you don't have the link, you may write me to skip.conover@gmail.com and I will send you the necessary links for this afternoon. And so thank you, Jordan, for
Definitely
working with me today. And
this is such a great pairing between Diane and Jerry.
okay, so the big cat asks, or I'm sorry, from Texas, says the psychedelic experience opens a way to seeing the world in a new way. And the big cat asks him, Texas, did you get your insight from psychedelics? And I'm not going to comment on those two comments, but I am going to say that my insights did not come from psychedelics. And if you're going that way, you're trying to take a shortcut to something that won't give you the wisdom that you need with it, and it may well kill you. Okay, and so great artists often have numinous experiences, and they produce something that's magnificent, but then they have writer's block or artist block, and they can't get back to that place. Mm-hmm. And what I would say to you is that great artists can get back to that place anytime, and you don't need psychedelics to do it. And so I would urge you not to use psychedelics to achieve a numinous experience, because that's cheap wisdom, I would say.
Well, you hit it the nail on the head when you said shortcut, because quick fixes have shallow roots.
Yeah.
You may have an experience, but you're kind of presenteeism. What are you going to do with it?
What are you going to do with it? And if you think that you're going to get back to it by continuing to take drugs, you're more likely to wake up dead. And so I urge you to, instead of doing that, and Jordan Peterson is school book example of that. Unintentionally, he didn't intentionally do it, but he got himself hooked on drugs. And even though he's a household word in many places across the world now, but he got himself hooked on drugs unintentionally. And the result of that was that it very nearly killed him. He fortunately survived, and it remains to be seen the wisdom that he takes out of that. But it's a case in point. Be warned. His daughter had to take him to Russia, and then to Bulgaria, and then, into Serbia, I think, and then back to Florida to save his life. And not everybody has enough money and a loved one like his daughter that is prepared to do the research and do what's necessary to save your life. And so, I certainly don't have that available. I don't have the funds available to do something like that. And so, I urge you to be very careful with drugs. And I'm not going to comment further on the YouTube channel. So anyway, okay, we'll see you this afternoon at 2 p.m. If you don't have the link, write to me at skip.conover@gmail.com, and I'll see you this afternoon. Hopefully I will have my voice recover sufficiently that I can be the MC. Dr. Wright has asked that we allow him to make his presentation, and then he'll be happy to respond to any comments or questions at the end. So that's the
Excellent.
way we're operating today. So thank you very much, everyone. We'll see you later.